The air in Ethan Moore's aging Honda Civic felt heavier than usual, thick with silence, tension, and the faint scent of old fast food wrappers. Parked behind a closed-down gas station on the outskirts of Clearwater County, Ethan sat behind the wheel, staring blankly at the glowing red numbers on his nearly drained gas gauge. In the back seat, his 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, was curled up beneath a thin blanket, a well-worn paperback, clutched in her arms like a stuffed animal. The temperature was dropping fast, and the condensation forming on the inside of the windshield mirrored the fog gathering in his mind. $437. That was it. That's all he had left to his name. 2 months ago, Ethan had been a respected high school history teacher. Now he was jobless, evicted, and sleeping in his car with the only person he had left in the world. He had sold off what little furniture they owned, maxed out his credit cards, and even tried applying for food stamps, only to be told the processing time could take weeks. It felt like the world was closing in, inch by inch, like a slow-moving avalanche with no escape. Sophie stirred in the back seat. "Daddy, are we going to go to the library tomorrow? I still want to finish that space book," she murmured sleepily. Her words, innocent and hopeful, punched Ethan in the gut, harder than any bill collector ever could. He turned slightly, forcing a tired smile. "We'll see, Peanut. Maybe something good will happen tomorrow." The next morning, while scrolling through his phone in search of odd jobs, Ethan stumbled upon an ad that seemed too strange to be true. County property auction, abandoned lots and seized properties, starting at $400, in-person attendance only. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it had to be a mistake. But the ad was real. The auction was scheduled for noon that day at the county fairgrounds. Ethan sat frozen for a minute. Then something clicked. What do I have to lose? Clearwater County had once been a hub for small farms and family-run businesses, but after a slow economic decline, more than a few properties had fallen into foreclosure. The idea of owning land, even if it was crumbling, half-burnt, or snake-infested, felt like a fantasy. Still, a fantasy was better than a back seat. He turned to Sophie. "Want to go to a farm auction?" She looked up, eyes bright despite everything. "Will there be animals?" "Maybe, but we're not buying a cow, just looking." They arrived at the county fairgrounds 20 minutes before the auction started. The sun was harsh and unforgiving, bouncing off rows of rusted pickup trucks and the occasional neon windbreaker. The crowd was mostly older men in boots and denim, looking like they'd been through their fair share of harvest seasons. Ethan stood out in his worn khakis and scuffed dress shoes, the kind you wear when you're still trying to pretend you haven't hit rock bottom. He clutched the auction pamphlet like a lifeline. Lot number 19. 3 acres, 1 farmhouse, abandoned, no interior inspection, starting bid, $400. As the auctioneer barked out numbers and waved his clipboard with theatrical flair, Ethan's heart pounded harder than it ever had in a classroom. Other lots went fast, tractors, equipment, some mobile homes, but when lot number 19 came up, the crowd fell oddly silent. All right, next item, lot 19, abandoned farmhouse out near Miller's Grove. We're starting at $400. Do I hear 400? Ethan glanced around. No one moved. 400? Anybody? The auctioneer repeated. Ethan raised his hand slowly, almost ashamed. 400, he said. The auctioneer nodded. Do I hear 450? Still silence. Going once, going twice. Sold. Lot 19 to bidder number 46. Ethan stood there, frozen. Sophie squeezed his hand. Did we just buy a house? She whispered. I think so, he replied, stunned. They signed a quick stack of forms, paid in cash, and received a battered manila envelope containing the deed, property map, and a ring of old keys. A grizzled man in overalls handed it to him and leaned in close. You sure you want that place? He said under his breath. Belonged to a man named Harrow. Ain't been touched in 30 years. People say it's cursed. Ethan forced a smile. It's a roof. Suit yourself. Just don't go digging where you don't belong. Back in the car, Sophie practically bounced in her seat. Do you think it has a fireplace? Or one of those attics with secret doors? Ethan looked at the keys in his hand. One of them was large, oddly ornate, and older than the rest. Maybe, he said, still processing what just happened, maybe it has a lot more than that. As they drove toward Miller's Grove, a tiny speck on the county map, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Motion. Not forward, not yet, but a change, a shift, like he was stepping onto a path no one else could see. What he didn't know, what nobody at that auction knew, was that Lot 19 had once been seized and sealed under quiet federal order, its existence practically erased from modern records. And buried beneath the weeds and rotted floorboards, a secret had been waiting, undisturbed, for nearly 60 years. No one at the auction knew that the farmhouse Ethan had just bought had once been quietly seized by the federal government, and hadn't been touched since the Cold War. The dirt road twisted like a scar through the trees, each bump and pothole jarring Ethan's spine as their old Honda Civic inched closer to the destination. Sophie leaned forward in the passenger seat, wide-eyed, the kind of wonder only an 8-year-old could summon for a place that looked like it belonged in a horror film. "There it is," she chirped, pointing ahead. The house loomed at the top of a slight hill, its silhouette battered and broken against the afternoon sky. The front porch sagged in the middle, its railings warped like brittle bones. A shutter banged loosely in the wind. Several upstairs windows were cracked or missing altogether, like blind eyes staring back at them. Ethan exhaled slowly, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Looks like we've got ourselves a fixer-upper." "That means it has character," Sophie said brightly, parroting something he'd once told her about a rusty lamp they rescued from a flea market. As they stepped out of the car, the dry grass crunched beneath their shoes. The place smelled of dust, mildew, and long-forgotten secrets. The front door creaked open with surprising ease, revealing an interior blanketed in cobwebs and silence. Faded wallpaper peeled in thick curls. A broken grandfather clock stood frozen at 3:12, its pendulum long gone. Somewhere deeper in the house, a floorboard moaned like it had been waiting decades to be noticed. "Stay close," Ethan murmured, flashlight in hand. They moved from room to room, living room, kitchen, dining room. Each space told a story that had been abruptly silenced. A framed photo of a man in military dress uniform lay face down on a dusty mantel. An old rotary phone sat disconnected, its cord stretched taut like it had been ripped mid-call. In the kitchen, an antique toaster sat beside a rusted percolator and a jar of expired instant coffee. But what unsettled Ethan the most wasn't the decay. It was how fortified the place felt. Reinforced beams ran along the basement walls. The doors were heavier than any normal farmhouse should require. And then there were the locks, not just on doors or cabinets, but odd places, closets, drawers, even the attic hatch. In the hallway near the back, Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, look." She pointed to what appeared to be a pantry door, except it was made of thick steel and bolted shut with a heavy padlock, definitely not pantry material. Above it, faintly etched into the wood, were the initials W.H. "Great," Ethan muttered. "We've got a dungeon." Sophie giggled, already imagining secret passageways and hidden treasure. The keyring they'd received at the auction had 5 old brass keys. None fit. He tried anyway, one after the other, while Sophie stood beside him, curious. "This one's different," she whispered. "It feels older." Ethan felt it too. The air around the door was colder, musty, like whatever was down there had gone untouched for years, and wanted to stay that way. Just then, a truck engine rumbled outside. Ethan rushed out, Sophie on his heels. A dusty blue pickup had pulled up by the gate. A thin man with a leathery face and tobacco-stained mustache stepped out. He wore a cap that read, "Clearwater Livestock Company." "You the one bought this place?" the man asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "You the seller?" "I handle estate liquidations. Harrow's next of kin signed it over after years of letting it rot. Didn't think anyone would actually buy it." Ethan offered a half smile. "Lucky me." The man shrugged and spat in the dirt. "Just a word of warning." Ethan raised an eyebrow. Harrow wasn't ordinary. Kept to himself. Always said he was guarding something more important than people could understand. Never married, no pets. Only went into town to pick up shortwave radio parts. "Did he work for the government or something?" The man gave a sharp look. "Some folks thought so. Others thought he was just nuts. Either way, if I were you, I'd leave that basement locked." Ethan didn't respond. The man climbed back into his truck and drove off, tires crunching against gravel. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting the house in long orange shadows, Ethan and Sophie sat on the dusty floor of the living room, surrounded by blankets and cold sandwiches. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. "I like it," Sophie said, her chin propped on her knees. "You like everything," Ethan replied, smiling despite himself. "But this place is special. I can feel it." He studied her for a moment. "You don't find it creepy?" "Nope, just forgotten." Ethan turned that over in his mind. Forgotten. That felt right. This place wasn't abandoned. It had been deliberately tucked away, sealed off from the world. The basement door haunted his thoughts as the wind picked up outside, moaning through broken panes and down empty hallways. Before bed, Ethan flipped through the worn leather folder containing all the documents he'd received at the auction. Most of it was generic: property tax records, county inspection reports from decades past. But tucked in the back, yellowed with age, was a folded blueprint, hand-drawn, faded, and marked with tiny handwritten notes. He unfolded it on the floor, tracing the lines with his finger. Kitchen, pantry, then storage facility, level 1. The words were faint, almost erased. What the hell? He turned the blueprint sideways. It clearly showed a lower level not mentioned in the public records. A structure beneath the house, larger than the basement footprint, with thick walls and labeled chambers. Sophie leaned over his shoulder, yawning. "Is that a secret lair?" "Something like that," Ethan muttered. Outside, an owl hooted in the trees. Inside, something in the walls creaked. He looked toward the hallway, toward the sealed metal door that no longer felt like just a curiosity, but a warning. As Ethan rolled up the blueprint, a chill ran through him. The words "storage facility, level 1" weren't part of any official county record, and the deeper he stared at the sketched outline, the more it looked like something designed not to store, but to contain. The morning sun filtered through a veil of thin clouds as Ethan parked his dusty Ford sedan in front of the Clearwater Public Library. The building was modest, red brick with faded white trim and a shingled roof, but it stood with a quiet authority, much like the knowledge it housed. Sophie had begged to come along, but Ethan convinced her to stay at the farmhouse with a stack of coloring books and a promise to bring back a story. Truthfully, he needed time to think, alone. Inside, the library smelled of old paper and lemon polish. It was the kind of scent that brought back memories of his teaching days, quiet study halls, dusty textbooks, the hum of young curiosity. He hadn't realized how much he missed that rhythm of quiet inquiry until now. At the front desk sat a woman in her early 60s, her silver gray hair coiled in a tight bun. She wore a cardigan despite the warmth of the day, and peered at Ethan over a pair of thin-rimmed glasses that magnified sharp, discerning eyes. "Good morning," Ethan began, trying to muster a polite, non-invasive tone. "I was wondering if you had any information on a man named Walter Harrow. He used to own a property just south of Mill Creek Road." The woman's expression didn't change, but her gaze sharpened. She slowly closed the ledger in front of her. "That would depend," she said, her voice crisp. "Are you the new owner of the Harrow place?" "Yes, I am," Ethan replied. "I bought it at auction a few days ago. My daughter and I just moved in." She studied him for a beat longer, then extended a hand. "Eleanor Fernsby, head librarian and, in some circles, the town's unofficial historian. Come with me." Eleanor led him past rows of well-worn shelves into a back room marked Archives. The space was dimly lit and filled with metal filing cabinets, old newspapers bound with string, and cardboard boxes labeled in faded marker. She pulled out a file and laid it flat on a reading table. "Walter Harrow," she said, tapping the label on the folder. "He was many things: recluse, veteran, eccentric, but mostly he was a government man, quietly so, too quietly." Ethan leaned over the folder as she opened it. Inside were yellowing newspaper clippings, grainy black and white photos, and typed government memos redacted with thick black lines. He served as a regional coordinator for something called the Infrastructure Contingency Initiative, Eleanor said. Started in the early 1950s during the Cold War. Sounds vague, doesn't it? That's because it was. They kept the descriptions intentionally opaque, but if you look closely, she pointed to a line in one memo that read, "All installations classified under Project Weathervane are to remain dormant unless Omega status is reached." Weathervane? Ethan asked. "A contingency plan," Eleanor said. "The government built a network of underground facilities, bunkers, data centers, relay hubs, in the event of nuclear war. Clearwater was one of the sites. Walter was its caretaker." Ethan felt the air grow heavier. It was one thing to stumble upon a mysterious basement door. It was another to hear that the man who built it might have been guarding a Cold War-era government installation. "Do you know what happened to him?" Ethan asked. Eleanor paused. "He disappeared in 1987. Just vanished. No official report. No search party. Rumor has it, the feds came in quietly one night, took documents, sealed everything. When people asked, they were told it was a matter of national security. You know what that means?" Ethan exhaled slowly. This was bigger than he'd imagined. "Do you know if anyone in town might have more information? Family, maybe?" Eleanor nodded. "Sheriff Donovan Harrow, his nephew. He runs the sheriff's department now. Keeps his head down, but he knows more than he lets on. He might talk to you, especially if he knows you're living in that house." As Ethan closed the folder, a loose photograph slipped out. He picked it up and stared. It was Walter Harrow, unmistakably younger, shaking hands with someone on the White House lawn. The second man's face was turned slightly, but the hair, the jawline, it was him, President John F. Kennedy. Eleanor noticed his reaction. "That photo's not supposed to exist. It showed up in a box of donations from the Harrow estate. I keep it back here for safekeeping." Ethan held the photo like it might vanish. If Walter had been involved at that level, then this wasn't just a bunker. This was history, a hidden chapter of it. He thanked Eleanor and left with the folder tucked under his arm, the weight of it far more than paper. As he stepped outside, the wind picked up slightly, sending a flurry of leaves across the parking lot. For the first time since moving in, Ethan didn't just feel like a man trying to survive. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something extraordinary. In the photo's bottom corner, nearly smudged by time, was a handwritten note in faint pencil. "Keystone must remain hidden. Not all are ready for what lies beneath." The morning after their trip to the library, Ethan stood in the kitchen of the farmhouse, mug of stale coffee in hand, scanning the room with a new sense of unease. The place felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge of Walter Harrow's mysterious past. Dust motes danced in the sunlight slipping through torn curtains, and every creak of the floorboards made Ethan's nerves tighten. He had just begun cleaning the kitchen, hoping to distract himself, when something odd caught his attention behind an old oak cabinet fixed against the wall. The baseboards around it didn't line up like the rest. With effort, Ethan pried the cabinet aside, revealing a small wooden door barely 4 feet tall, flush with the wall, and camouflaged in faded wallpaper. "Sophie," he called, wiping sweat from his brow. She came running in, still gripping the worn copy of Charlotte's Web she refused to put down since their move. "Secret door?" she asked, eyes wide. "Looks like it," Ethan murmured. He knelt, brushing dust from the small handle. The door had a sturdy padlock, old and rusting, but clearly added after the original construction. "What do you think is down there?" Sophie whispered. "Hopefully just old boxes and bad insulation," Ethan muttered, but his tone lacked conviction. Sophie, with the imagination of an 8-year-old, grinned. "It could be like a garden from another world. Maybe there's treasure, or a hidden library, like a secret garden, but under the house." Ethan smiled despite himself. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but he couldn't shake the prickling feeling creeping up his spine. He examined the padlock more closely. None of the keys from the envelope given to him at the auction fit. Whoever had put this here didn't want anyone getting in. Later that afternoon, Ethan sat on the front steps, flipping through the old documents he had received with the deed. One of them was a yellowed blueprint of the property, likely decades old. Most of it was standard, main floor, attic, septic system layout, until his eyes caught a faint sketch in pencil at the corner, a rectangle beneath the kitchen, labeled in tight script, "Storage Facility B." No stairs leading to it, no mention of its purpose, just a boxed-in shape surrounded by reinforced lines and a red X. He stared at the notation, Something about it felt off, government style. That night, while Sophie slept upstairs in her sleeping bag, Ethan returned to the door with a flashlight. He sat cross-legged in front of it, the soft ticking of the kitchen clock the only sound. He couldn't explain why he felt the need to be near it, why it was calling to him. He replayed everything from the auction, the strange hesitance when the auctioneer announced the property, the way the room had gone uncomfortably quiet, the gruff man who had muttered, "Harrow wasn't your average neighbor," as he passed Ethan after the sale. He pointed the flashlight at the base of the door, tiny scuffs in the wood. Recent? Old? It was hard to say. Was someone trying to get in or out? His thoughts spiraled. What if Walter Harrow had been hiding something? Not just secrets, but something, some place, too important to be left unguarded. Maybe that's why the lock didn't match anything else in the house. Maybe that's why the official records showed nothing beyond a standard basement. But here, in this forgotten farmhouse bought for $400 in desperation, was a door that led to... what? He stood abruptly, a cold shiver racing down his spine. No, he told himself. Not tonight. He wouldn't open it without knowing more, without being sure Sophie was safe, without understanding what exactly Walter Harrow had been trying so hard to keep hidden. He returned to the living room, flashlight still in hand, glancing once more over his shoulder at the locked door. As he turned off the light and settled onto the dusty old couch, one thought refused to leave him. If this was just a basement, why did it feel like someone had gone to such lengths to erase it from memory? The next morning, Ethan rummaged through the kitchen drawer where he'd placed the blueprint. He flipped it over and examined it again. Faint pencil notes scribbled near the storage area. Authorized access only. S-class clearance. Below that, partially smudged by time, were the words, "Install failsafe. No access without retrieval key." Retrieval key. There was more to this place than just neglect and mystery. Someone had designed this house, or at least modified it, with the intent of hiding something. And based on the records and blueprints, whatever was hidden wasn't just old furniture or forgotten wine. It was protected. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. While Sophie mumbled softly in her dreams, he stood again in the kitchen, flashlight aimed downward through the crack under the hidden door. Just darkness. But then he noticed something strange, a faint metallic glint, like the edge of a steel beam or panel reflecting the light. His hand trembled. Whatever was down there didn't belong in an old wooden farmhouse. As the flashlight beam wavered across the narrow gap beneath the basement door, Ethan's breath caught. There, far below the floorboards, something metallic shimmered, reinforced, deliberate, out of place. This wasn't just a forgotten crawl space. This was an entrance to something built, hidden, and protected for over half a century by someone who once worked deep within the government. And Ethan had just found it. The late morning sun poured over the red brick facade of the Clearwater Public Library, casting long shadows across the stone steps as Ethan and Sophie approached. It was the kind of library built before the internet, grand, quiet, and worn with memory. The town had changed, the world had changed, but this building had stood still. Sophie clutched a worn copy of Charlotte's Web she'd found in the backseat of the car, eyes wide with curiosity. Ethan, meanwhile, carried a quiet tension in his shoulders. He wasn't here for storybooks. They stepped into the cool, paper-scented air of the library. Wooden shelves lined the walls like ribs, holding the heart of the place in. At the front desk, a petite woman with silver hair and wire-frame glasses glanced up from her filing. Her name tag read Eleanor Fernsby. She looked exactly like the kind of librarian who might remember what a man did in 1957. "Good morning," Ethan began. "I'm looking for any records you might have on a man named Walter Hargrave. He used to own the farmhouse out on Route 17. Eleanor's eyes froze for a beat too long. Her gaze flicked briefly to Sophie, then back to Ethan. "And who might you be to Walter Hargrave?" "I just bought his old property, found some strange things there. Thought it might help to know more about him." Eleanor pursed her lips, then motioned toward a back table nestled between two stacks labeled Local History. "Wait there. I'll see what we still have." Ethan watched her go, then sat across from Sophie, who had already buried her nose in her book. A few minutes later, Eleanor returned with a small stack of manila folders and a faded microfilm box. She slid them across the table. "Most of it's off the record," she said quietly. "But I remember Walter. Everyone did, even if they pretended not to." Ethan opened the first folder. Yellowed newspaper clippings, old census records, a few blurry photographs. One in particular stood out. A grainy black and white shot of a tall, solemn man standing beside a flagpole. The caption read, "Walter Hargrave, 1962. Local veteran donates land for civil preparedness drill." "He was military?" Ethan asked. Eleanor nodded. "Army intelligence, we think. Maybe even something more covert. He never talked about it, not even to his late wife. But you'd see the signs. That man never blinked when a helicopter passed overhead. Built that farmhouse like a fortress. Reinforced basement, steel-lined walls, generators. Back in the day, people just thought he was paranoid." Ethan kept flipping. One article referenced Hargrave's disappearance in 1987. It was only a few paragraphs, mentioning that he hadn't been seen in weeks and that no foul play was suspected. No follow-up, no investigation. "That was it?" Ethan asked. "He vanished and no one looked into it?" "It was the way things were back then," Eleanor said, voice hushed. "People knew what to ask and, more importantly, what not to, especially after those visitors." Ethan paused. Visitors. Eleanor's fingers drummed the table, her eyes scanning the library's main room. Black SUVs, men in dark suits. Always came after midnight, never during the day. Parked at the far end of Hargrave's property, stayed for hours. No one knew where they went or what they wanted, but Walter stopped coming into town after they started visiting. Sophie peeked up from her book. "Were they aliens?" Eleanor chuckled. "Not quite, dear, but they were strange enough." Ethan sat back, heart drumming. Every breadcrumb was leading him deeper into something far bigger than a lonely old man in a creaky house. "Do you know if Walter had any family still in town?" "One," Eleanor said, standing. She walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a Rolodex card. Donovan Harrow, his nephew, the sheriff. Ethan blinked. "The sheriff is Hargrave's nephew." "Blood relative, yes, but don't expect him to be forthcoming. Donovan's loyal. To the town, and the silence that's kept it safe all these years. Still, if anyone knows what Walter was really guarding down there, it's him." She handed Ethan a folded page from an old directory with Donovan's office number scribbled on the back. "If you're going to poke into this, do it carefully. This town forgets things on purpose." Ethan thanked her, then stood with Sophie. As they walked toward the door, Sophie looked up at him. "Do you think she's telling the truth?" "I think," Ethan said slowly, "that the truth might be a lot more complicated than I thought." As they stepped back into the sun, the weight of what he'd just learned pressed down harder than ever. The reinforced basement, the sealed door, the classified past of a man who had vanished without a trace. Something was hidden beneath that farmhouse, and it wasn't just rotting wood and rusted pipes. That night, as Ethan sat at the kitchen table studying the faded map from the property records again, a realization crept over him like a slow chill. He traced the markings that denoted the basement, then a dotted square deeper underground, one not labeled, not officially recorded. His fingers stopped on the word lightly penciled in the margin. Storage. But storage for what? If Eleanor was right, then the basement wasn't just a forgotten room. It was the burial site of secrets too dangerous to speak aloud. Secrets sealed with steel, silence, and the vanishing of a man who may have died protecting more than just his home. The morning was cool and crisp when Ethan pulled into the gravel parking lot of the Clearwater Sheriff's Department. He didn't know what he expected, but the squat brick building with faded signage looked more like a post office than a place of authority. Sophie stayed back at the house with a pile of old books they'd found in the attic, her curiosity temporarily sated. Ethan, on the other hand, carried the weight of every question that had kept him up the night before. Inside, the reception area was quiet. A woman in her 40s glanced up from behind the desk. "Help you?" she asked, not unkindly. "I'm here to see Sheriff Donovan Harrow," Ethan said. "It's about his uncle, Walter Harrow." The woman's face froze. She picked up a phone, murmured a few words, then gestured toward a hallway. Last door on the left. Ethan knocked, then stepped into the office. Donovan Harrow was nothing like Ethan had pictured. Mid-50s, wiry but broad-shouldered, his uniform neat, his eyes sharper than most. He didn't stand to greet Ethan, just leaned back in his chair and studied him. "You the one who bought Walter's old place?" "I am." "Ethan Moore." Donovan nodded slowly. "Didn't think anyone would ever touch that house again." "I didn't know what I was walking into," Ethan admitted. "But now, I have questions about Walter, about the house, about a locked door to a basement that looks like it wasn't meant to be found." Donovan steepled his fingers and leaned forward. "My uncle wasn't just a lonely old man. He worked for the federal government, not in any way you'd find in public records. Regional Operations Liaison, that's what they called him. But what he really did was oversee a project nobody was supposed to talk about. Cold War era, classified and buried so deep, most of the people involved are long dead or pretend they never knew about it." Ethan felt a chill run through him. "What kind of project?" Donovan hesitated, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a file. Its label read, "Hargrave, Walter, MIA, 1987. He placed the file on the desk and opened it slowly. "This was opened the day my uncle vanished, May 19th, 1987. He didn't leave a note, just walked off the face of the earth. The last communication he made was a coded message through a secure line. The contents were redacted, even to us. But whatever it wasn't routine." He pulled out a small ring of keys, the brass dulled with age. One of them had a small blue tag labeled B-Sub. "I found this in his effects," Donovan said. "It doesn't match anything in the main house. I kept it because, well, gut instinct." Ethan reached for the keys but paused. "Why are you giving this to me?" Donovan exhaled. "Because you're the one who found it. The house. The door. And maybe, just maybe, you were meant to. I don't know what's down there more, but I know my uncle wasn't crazy, and he sure as hell wasn't normal." Ethan took the key. Cold, heavy, final. "One more thing," Donovan said, voice lower now. "If you find anything unusual, anything you think might endanger people or looks like it came from a bad sci-fi novel, come back here. Don't go to the press. Don't post online. Come to me. You'll regret it if you don't." Ethan nodded. "I understand." Donovan studied him a beat longer. "I hope you do." As Ethan stepped out into the sun again, the key felt like it had grown heavier in his pocket, like it knew its own weight, its own history, its own secrets. He didn't drive home right away. He sat in the truck, staring out at the dusty road beyond the station. A choice loomed ahead, one that would either reveal a forgotten truth or bury it for good. Either way, the key had turned in his hand, and there would be no going back. The cold brass key rested in Ethan's palm like a relic dug from a grave, and deep in his gut, he knew. Once that lock turned, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. The key slid into the old lock with a reluctant click, as if the house itself hesitated to reveal what it had buried for decades. Ethan paused, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the tarnished knob. Sophie stood behind him, her small fingers gripping the hem of his coat, wide-eyed but quiet. The silence between them carried the weight of everything they didn't understand. Yet, with a deep breath, Ethan turned the knob and pulled. The door groaned open, its hinges shrieking against rust and time. A cold draft rose from the dark below, carrying with it the smell of earth, dust, and something else. Something metallic, sterile, and strangely out of place. A narrow wooden staircase descended into the dark. Ethan flicked on the flashlight he'd tucked into his jacket pocket, casting a jittery beam down the stairs. Each step creaked underfoot as they descended, Ethan first, Sophie trailing close behind. He could feel her unease, but she didn't speak. The staircase led farther down than expected. They passed the depth of a typical basement, then kept going. After what felt like an eternity, the staircase ended at a concrete landing. Ethan raised the flashlight. Before them stood a heavy metal door, industrial, reinforced, and completely incongruous with the rundown farmhouse above. A faded red wheel handle protruded from the center. Next to the door, a rusted keypad with a broken display blinked faintly, long dead. The door bore no markings, no numbers, just the thick aura of secrets. Ethan pressed his palm to the door. It was ice cold. "Dad, this doesn't look like a normal basement," Sophie whispered. He nodded. "It's not." With a grunt, Ethan twisted the wheel. It shrieked, but gave way slowly, and the door creaked open with the groan of metal rubbing metal. They stepped inside, breath catching. The room beyond was a time capsule. Dim emergency lights flickered to life as they entered, powered by a long-dead generator that had just enough juice left to respond to motion. The space was enormous, far bigger than the house's footprint should allow. Concrete walls, reinforced beams, steel supports. It was a fallout shelter, but not just any shelter. Along one wall stood metal bunk beds with military-issue mattresses, still made and undisturbed. A water filtration system, now dormant, sat beside a wall of sealed storage containers labeled U.S. Civil Defense. A long table occupied the center of the room, cluttered with maps, dusty files, and devices Ethan didn't recognize. Radios, old and silent, stacked beside an antennae system rigged through a thick concrete vent. The maps were of the United States, color-coded, covered in pins and threads of red string linking locations. "Dad, what is this place?" Sophie asked, awestruck. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stepped to the map and traced a finger from Clearwater, their tiny dot on the map, to Washington, D.C., then across to Los Alamos, New Mexico, and finally to a spot in rural Nevada. Every point was pinned, connected, forming a network of something, a monitoring system, a chain of communication, surveillance. In one corner, a corkboard held newspaper clippings and black and white photos. Most were water-damaged or faded beyond recognition, but one image caught Ethan's eye. A stern man in uniform, standing beside what appeared to be an early model communications satellite. Ethan squinted. The man was younger, but familiar. "That has to be Walter Hargrave," he muttered. Sophie moved beside him. "Who's the other man in the picture?" Ethan stared closer. There was another photo tucked behind the first, barely visible under a sheet of protective plastic. He carefully pulled it free, coughing at the dust it released. This one made him stop cold. Walter Hargrave, older now, in a suit, standing on the south lawn of the White House. And beside him, unmistakable even in the yellowing photograph, stood President John F. Kennedy. Ethan's hand tightened around the edge of the corkboard. "What the hell were you into, Walter?" The implications hit him like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a shelter. It was part of something bigger, the kind of operation that didn't show up in public records or high school textbooks. As he walked back toward the center table, his foot caught on something beneath a tarp. Pulling it back, he revealed a steel case with the Department of Defense insignia. Inside, carefully organized, were dozens of cassette reels, labeled with cryptic dates and codes. A journal sat atop them. Ethan opened it. The first entry was dated June 17th, 1962. The last, May 14th, 1987. That date rang out in Ethan's mind. The same year Walter disappeared. He flipped to the final page. The handwriting was rushed, shaky. "They know. Not much time left. If you're reading this, you need to find the failsafe. They must never control it." No signature, no explanation. Ethan looked around the room again, the weight of realization pressing into his chest. This was more than a hiding place. It was a command post, a node in a Cold War network that had gone silent the moment Walter vanished. He looked at Sophie, who was standing quietly near the bunks, gently tracing her fingers over a dusty teddy bear left behind. "We're not just fixing up an old house anymore," he whispered. "We're uncovering something people tried very hard to forget." He glanced back at the photograph of Kennedy and Walter, and in that moment, a shiver ran down Ethan's spine as he realized something chilling. This man, the former owner of their house, had stood side by side with the President of the United States and had disappeared protecting a secret that was never meant to be found. The bunker was silent, unnervingly so. The musty air hung still, and the only sounds Ethan could hear were his own breaths. Measured, careful, the kind you take when you're standing on the edge of something unknown. The overhead bulbs flickered once, then stabilized, casting a yellowish glow over the Cold War relic, that was somehow now his property. He approached the metal desk at the center of the room. It was bolted to the floor, military grade, thick and scratched with age. On top sat a meticulously arranged set of files, each labeled with tidy, precise handwriting. The first folder bore a simple title, Operation Weather Vane. Ethan slid it open. Inside were blueprints, memos, and reports, many stamped classified or eyes only. The project, according to the documents, was part of a federal continuity of government initiative during the Cold War, designed to preserve communication networks in case of nuclear war. His bunker, referred to by code name Keystone, was one of several decentralized outposts, tasked with monitoring incoming communications and maintaining emergency readiness. But then things got stranger. Tucked in the back of the folder was a worn, leather-bound notebook, aged but clearly well kept. Inside were handwritten entries signed by Walter Hargrave himself. May 4th, 1987, 0200 hours. Unusual signal detected on Channel 5B, non-terrestrial frequency. Triangulated coordinates suggest origin beyond lunar orbit. Spectrum analysis ongoing. Might be nothing, might be everything. Ethan reread the passage 3 times, heart quickening with each scan. A non-terrestrial frequency. Beyond the moon? Further entries charted a growing obsession. Walter wrote daily, documenting shifts in signal patterns, cryptographic attempts, and dreams. Yes, literal dreams that he believed were being influenced by the signal. May 14, 1987, 0303 hours. It's no longer random. Patterns forming, structured pulses, language maybe. Spoke to Eleanor about this. She believes me, or at least pretends to. May 20th, 1987, 2246 hours. God forgive us. If Omega is real, I must protect it, even from them, especially from them. There it was. Omega. Ethan sifted through the papers, searching for clarity. Beneath a pile of mission briefings, he found a folded map of the United States marked with small colored pins, many of which connected with thin red threads to Clearwater, Missouri. His eyes traced the intricate network. It wasn't just bunkers. It looked like a system of surveillance or communication. His gaze returned to the wall where the photograph of President Kennedy and Hargrave hung. The image had taken on a different weight now. That handshake, it was no longer symbolic. It was a pact. As if drawn by instinct, Ethan lifted the framed photo. Behind it, embedded flush into the concrete wall, was a small steel door, a hidden wall safe. Etched just below the combination dial was a line in faded Sharpie. Open only if situation Omega is confirmed. Ethan stared, frozen. He hadn't confirmed anything. Not yet. But deep down he knew. Whatever Hargrave had been protecting wasn't just a military asset. The journal entries, the signals, the maps, they all pointed to something bigger, something not made by human hands. He stepped back, heart pounding, and paced the room. Sophie's laughter echoed faintly from upstairs. She had no idea what lay beneath her feet. Neither did most of the world. But Walter Hargrave had known, and he'd chosen secrecy over disclosure, isolation over exposure. What kind of truth demands that kind of sacrifice? Ethan sat back down and opened the journal one last time. On the inside back cover, scrawled in the same neat cursive, was a single line. If you're reading this, it's too late for me, but not for you. As Ethan's hand hovered over the safe's dial, one chilling thought refused to leave him. What did Walter lock away so tightly that he'd rather vanish than let it fall into the wrong hands? The key turned with a reluctant click, and the metal door creaked open to reveal a space untouched by light for over 3 decades. Ethan stood in the threshold of Room C, heart pounding, unsure whether he was stepping into history or something far stranger. A rush of cold, sterile air spilled from the chamber, like a breath exhaled after holding for years. The floor glistened faintly with frost. The hum of dormant machinery echoed softly against concrete walls that seemed too clean for a farmhouse basement. The room was nothing like the others in the bunker, where the rest of the facility was outfitted for human survival: beds, radios, communication maps. Room C was surgical in its precision, designed for containment, not comfort. Dominating the center was a cylindrical glass tube suspended within a titanium frame, bolted to the foundation itself. And inside the tube was the object. It hovered in zero-gravity suspension, with slow, deliberate rotations like it was pacing through time. The artifact was the size of a basketball, but entirely unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Its surface shimmered with metallic plates that shifted like fish scales over a core of pulsating organic tissue. Lines of pulsing blue-green light traced symbols that didn't belong to any human language. It looked alive, but dormant, waiting. Ethan approached cautiously. His hands still trembled from what he'd found in the wall safe upstairs. A small, leather-bound notebook and a plastic keycard labeled Room C, Clearance Level Alpha. The notebook, written in Walter Hargrave's unmistakable cursive, had contained 2 sets of codes, one for Room C and the other for a decryption interface installed in the control panel next to the containment chamber. He typed the codes slowly. Lights blinked to life around him, illuminating the chamber with a low cyan glow. A monitor attached to the base of the glass tube flickered and displayed a digital waveform, spiky, symmetrical, and disturbingly regular. At first, Ethan thought it was a recording. But then, the screen refreshed. The pattern changed. It was live. He froze. A second screen activated beside the first. It showed a reverse signal trace, something responding on the other end. Ethan's skin chilled as he watched the timestamp scroll. The incoming signals had continued, every 6 hours, for the past 36 years. Only now, the reply pattern had started to change. Shorter gaps, higher frequency. The responses were getting faster. He flipped through Walter's notebook again. Toward the back, there were pages he hadn't noticed before. Sketches of the object, notes on electromagnetic frequency ranges, radiation signatures, and beneath all that, a single line circled in red ink. If the signal accelerates, prepare for phase omega. Phase omega. That phrase again. He'd seen it in the war bunker files, mentioned in coded radio messages and scribbled in the margins of maps. It hadn't made sense then, but now, staring at the thing inside the tube, it was obvious. Omega wasn't a final defense plan. It wasn't even about survival. It was contact. Ethan sank into the rolling chair by the console and watched as the waveform stabilized, then pulsed once, sharper, brighter. His fingers hovered above the input keys. The urge to respond clawed at him, but so did fear. This wasn't a message from Moscow, or Beijing, or some Cold War ghost. This was something else. And somehow, Walter had known. He pressed play on the final audio file stored on the console. Walter's voice crackled to life. If you're hearing this, then I didn't make it to the end. That's fine. Maybe I was never supposed to. But you, whoever you are, you're standing where I stood. And now, it's your turn to choose. Don't talk to them unless you're ready to listen. Really listen. Because once you hear them, you won't unhear it. God help us all. The recording ended with static. Ethan leaned back, mind racing. This wasn't about military secrets or buried treasure. It was about something far bigger, something that had waited patiently for someone to find it. The contact wasn't pending. It had already begun. He turned to the screen. The waveform spiked. New characters, unreadable, almost organic in form, flashed across the screen. A synthetic voice emerged, distorted but unmistakable, processed through decades-old equipment. Acknowledged. Preparing transfer. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stared, unmoving, as the object inside the glass glowed brighter. It wasn't threatening. It was activating. The bunker's lights dimmed momentarily. A pulse vibrated through the floor. Somewhere above, a circuit tripped. The house groaned. Then silence. For a moment, he thought it was over. A false alarm. A broken machine playing back an old loop. Then the second signal came. It was louder, more deliberate. A long burst, followed by a series of short pulses. And then, a response. Ethan didn't need a decoder to understand what he was hearing. He felt it. They were coming. The room pulsed again. Ethan stood slowly, notebook still in his hand, as the signal grew stronger. The screen flickered one final time, showing a coordinate, Clearwater's exact location, followed by a single English word blinking over and over. Ready. The next morning, Ethan left Sophie at home with a stack of library books and strict instructions not to answer the door. He knew today wouldn't be ordinary, not after what he saw in Room C, Not after what he felt the moment that pulse from the device spiked, vibrating in the very air around him like a silent siren. He drove through Clearwater in a haze, replaying Walter's notes in his mind. The phrase, Protocol 7, stuck out like a splinter. He needed answers, and if anyone could give them, it would be the woman who seemed to know too much for a small-town librarian. Eleanor Fernsby was already waiting when he stepped into the dusty reading room. She didn't greet him with surprise, just a calm nod, as if she had expected him at that very hour. "You opened it," she said plainly. Ethan hesitated. "I did, and there's something down there that doesn't belong on any blueprint or in any history book I've ever taught." She gestured for him to sit, drawing the heavy curtains shut around the old wood-paneled study. "Then it's time you learned why Walter chose to disappear, and why you, Mr. Moore, might be the last person who ever needed to see what's down there." From the bottom drawer of a locked cabinet, she retrieved a metallic device no larger than a deck of cards. It had a single button and a red light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Walter called it a beacon," she said. "It's not just a signal. It's a call to those who were once entrusted with the truth, members of a network formed under Project Keystone. 7 people. Only 4 are still alive, as far as I know. They called themselves Protocol 7. Ethan stared. "You're telling me there's a group of people who knew about the object? About what it really is?" Eleanor nodded solemnly. "And more than that, they were tasked with ensuring it never fell into the wrong hands. The device you found is not simply alien. It's a relay, a bridge, and it was never fully dormant. Walter knew it. He knew what that meant." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, overwhelmed. "So why me? Why leave it all for someone like me to stumble on?" "Because Walter trusted that the one who opened that vault wouldn't be looking for power or prestige. He believed it would be someone desperate, someone who had lost everything and had no reason to lie." The words landed heavily. She held out the beacon. "Press it. If the others are alive, they will come. But be warned, this also alerts the ones who would rather bury the truth forever." Ethan took a breath, then pressed the button. The beacon glowed, then went still. Eleanor looked toward the window. "Now, we wait." Later that afternoon, Sheriff Donovan Harrow knocked on the farmhouse door, looking older than he had the day before. He stepped in, took off his hat, and asked to see the device. "It's awake now," Ethan told him, "and so is everything around it." Donovan nodded slowly. "Then it won't be long before someone tries to take it. You need to understand something, Ethan. There are factions within the government, some legitimate, some rogue. Walter fought to keep Keystone under Protocol 7's protection because he didn't trust the official channels." Ethan frowned. "So, we're not just talking about secrecy. We're talking about a war over what this thing means." "Exactly," Donovan replied. "And now, you're holding the key to it all. You might think you're not the chosen one, but you are in the right place. And unfortunately, that's all that matters." They spent the evening securing the house, barricading the basement entrance, and setting up old motion sensors Walter had left boxed in the pantry. Donovan handed Ethan an encrypted satellite phone and left, but not before saying, "If you hear vehicles after midnight, don't assume they're ours." That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep clutching a book under her blanket, Ethan sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the beacon. It hadn't blinked again since the initial pulse, but the air felt heavier, charged. At 2:14 a.m., headlights swept across the living room window. He stood, heart thudding. A black SUV crawled up the gravel driveway, its engine unnaturally quiet. The passenger door opened. A tall woman stepped out, dressed in a gray pantsuit, her heels crunching the stones beneath her. She carried no weapon, just a badge. She held it up to the porch light. "Diana Collins, Department of Energy. I believe you have something I need to see." Ethan narrowed his eyes. She smiled faintly. "Don't worry, I didn't come alone." From the shadows behind her, 2 more figures emerged. The gate was open, and now so were the floodgates. The real war wasn't between nations. It was between those who knew and those who would kill to keep it hidden. Diana Collins returned just as dusk began to creep across the valley, her government-issued SUV kicking up dust as it crunched across the gravel driveway of the farmhouse. Ethan stood by the porch, arms crossed, watching as she stepped out with deliberate precision. Her dark suit was immaculate, her face unreadable. She held up her badge again, Department of Energy, but now it felt more like a mask than a credential. "Mr. Moore," she began without pleasantries, "this is a matter of national security. I need access to the structure beneath your property immediately." Ethan didn't flinch. He had read every page of Walter Hargrave's notes, every scribbled equation, every intercepted transmission, and more importantly, he had felt the weight of Alpha One's silent hum. It wasn't just some piece of tech. It was a beacon, a key. "You're not from the DOE," Ethan said calmly. "Not really. You're part of something else, something off books. Alpha One isn't just your next pet project to dissect and weaponize. It's a message we were never meant to hear." Collins narrowed her eyes. "You've been reading files you had no clearance for. That's already a federal offense. I'm not here to debate ethics. I'm here because what lies beneath this property belongs to the United States government." Before Ethan could respond, the hum of another vehicle rolled in. Sheriff Donovan Harrow's patrol truck screeched to a halt beside the SUV. From the passenger side emerged Eleanor Fernsby, her weathered face set with purpose. Donovan stepped forward, his hand resting on the holster but not drawing. "You might want to take a breath, Agent Collins," Donovan said. "This land is under local jurisdiction until a federal order says otherwise. And Ethan here has shared some interesting documentation that calls your authority into question." Eleanor stepped between them, holding an envelope. "This is a notarized statement from Walter Hargrave, written before his disappearance. It grants temporary custodianship of the bunker and Alpha One to the current owner of the land, should a Situation Omega be triggered." Collins' mouth twitched slightly, then flattened into a tight line. She took a slow breath and turned to Ethan. "You're playing with fire. You don't understand what you're dealing with." Ethan's voice was steady. "No, you're the one who doesn't understand. This isn't just about containment anymore. It's about communication. Someone is trying to reach us, and we've spent decades ignoring it." Collins glanced at the others. She knew she had been outmaneuvered for now. Without another word, she returned to her vehicle and drove off, tires spitting gravel as she disappeared into the dusk. Ethan turned to Donovan. "She'll be back, and next time, she won't be alone." Donovan nodded. "Then we'd better be ready." Back in the bunker, Ethan moved with purpose. He re-engaged the biometric locks, securing every entrance except the one tied to Protocol 7. Within minutes, the core systems of Alpha One flickered to full operational mode. Eleanor watched as a slow pulse of blue light began to glow from the device's center. "It's accelerating," she whispered. "The pattern's changed. It's a language." "No," Ethan said, eyes fixed on the display. "It's a response." Alpha One's console began translating the pulses into rudimentary English. The syntax was broken, but clear. Repeated sequences of numbers gave way to structure. And then, words. Initiating contact. Stand by. The air in the bunker turned electric. Ethan looked at the others, his voice low. "It's no longer just a signal. It's a conversation." They stood in silence as Alpha One's transmission looped again, louder, clearer. Initiating contact. Stand by. What waited on the other end of that transmission, friend, foe, or something beyond comprehension, was about to change everything Ethan thought he understood about history, humanity, and his own place in the universe. The air inside the bunker had shifted. It wasn't just the hum of machines or the sterile flicker of fluorescent lights. There was something else now, an undercurrent, an electricity that ran not through wires, but through people. Ethan stood in the center of it all, the hum of Alpha One growing more rhythmic, more deliberate. This was no longer a mystery to solve. It was a conversation waiting to begin. He gathered everyone inside the central control room. Donovan stood tall, eyes shadowed but resolute. Eleanor Fernsby adjusted her glasses and glanced toward the monitors, her lips whispering silent calculations. The two new arrivals, Miles and Dr. Annika Ruiz, both members of Protocol 7, sat across from the control panel, hands resting just inches from the blinking switches. "Is everyone ready?" Ethan asked, his voice steadier than he expected. They all nodded. Ethan flipped the final breaker. The bunker, dormant for nearly 4 decades, awakened with purpose. Monitors blinked to life. Antennae mounted in the surrounding fields began to rotate, their sensors calibrated to the sky. Lights within Alpha 1's containment chamber pulsed, shifting from dull amber to a glowing cyan. Then came the sound, an undulating tone that repeated at perfect intervals. On the main screen, Alpha 1 was translating the pulses. A grid filled with symbols began to emerge. DNA sequences. Human. Not one individual's, but a generic model. The message was clear. The entity or intelligence on the other end was trying to confirm its recipient, humanity. Miles stepped forward. "We're being pinged," he said. "It's asking if we're still here." Ethan's heart pounded. For weeks, he had been pulled into this, starting from a broken-down truck, a desperate auction, a house no one wanted. Now he stood at the axis of something that reached across the stars. He turned to the group. "We have to answer, but we don't do it like they expect. We don't show them our weapons or our satellites. We show them what makes us human." He grabbed the camcorder and handed it to Dr. Ruiz. "Record this. From now on, everything stays documented, transparent, no hiding." Ruiz nodded and hit record. Ethan knelt beside Sophie, who had entered quietly moments earlier and now stood at the edge of the room, eyes wide with wonder. "You ready for your close-up, kiddo?" She giggled, a little nervous but curious. "Are we going to talk to aliens, Daddy?" "We might," he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face, "and I want them to see someone worth listening to." He sat her in the chair in front of Alpha 1's camera system. The machine responded instantly. Light danced within its core, matching her movement, syncing with her rhythm. Ruiz whispered, awestruck. "It's responding to her biometrics." "Of course it is," Eleanor murmured. "It was never about politicians or scientists. It was always about connection." Sophie waved. "Hi, my name is Sophie Moore. I like books. My favorite is Charlotte's Web, and my dad makes the best peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in the world." The machine pulsed rapidly. Alpha 1's chamber glowed a deep green, then pale blue. Audio feedback crackled through the speakers. A pulse turned into tone, and then tone turned into a single word in English. Acknowledged. The room froze. No one breathed. Then a second word came. Listening. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. After all the fear, after all the secrecy, this was it. Not invasion, not war, but understanding. He stepped forward, standing beside his daughter. "My name is Ethan Moore. I'm no one special. I was a teacher. I lost my wife. I lost my job. I thought I had nothing left, but this house, this place, it gave me a second chance." The lights of Alpha 1 shimmered. A panel on the right lit up with new symbols, an invitation. It was asking for more, not coordinates, not defenses, stories, emotions, truth. Eleanor leaned into the mic. "This is Clearwater, Colorado. We don't speak for the planet, but we speak for ourselves, and we're ready to listen, too." Donovan adjusted a nearby dial. "Signal's stable, power holding steady. They're not leaving. They're waiting." Ethan glanced at the others. He knew there was no turning back now. The footage they recorded would be backed up, encrypted, shared across redundant networks. This moment would not be buried. As the team began preparing a second message, Sophie looked back over her shoulder. "Daddy?" "Yeah." "Do you think they have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches where they're from?" He chuckled through tears. "I don't know, kiddo, but if they don't, we'll teach them." The final transmission began. Light, sound, biodata, and then an image, one still frame. Sophie's smile. Alpha 1 surged to life. A final beam of blue light burst from its core, transmitting upward into the antenna, into the sky. And somewhere, far beyond Earth, something answered. As the light faded, Alpha 1 displayed a final pulse of DNA, one sequence only, a child's, a silent message embedded in code. We are ready to listen. Sometimes life takes everything from you before it offers even the faintest sign of hope. Ethan Moore wasn't trying to find history or some long-buried secret beneath a forgotten farmhouse. He just wanted a roof for his daughter, a little peace, a chance to feel human again. But life, in its strange way, doesn't always give us what we ask for. Sometimes it gives us what we're meant to find. What started with a broken man in a cold car, a little girl clutching a worn-out book, and $437 to his name, ended with something bigger than both of them, a signal, a conversation, a moment in time where humanity wasn't represented by diplomats, generals, or billionaires, but by a father who still believed in bedtime stories and a child who smiled at the stars. It's easy to think we're small in this world, just names on mailboxes, numbers in a system, flickers on a screen. But stories like this remind us that sometimes the smallest voices are the ones that reach the farthest. Ethan didn't set out to become a guardian of truth. He didn't plan to unlock a Cold War-era vault, confront shadowy government agents, or sit at a table where the next sentence spoken could change what we know about our place in the universe. He just listened, and in doing so, he reminded us all of something timeless, that listening, truly listening, with empathy, with honesty, with curiosity, is an act of courage. In a world that moves too fast, speaks too loud, and forgets too easily, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is here. So now it's your turn. What would you have done in Ethan's shoes? Would you have opened the vault, stayed silent, or sent that signal into the dark? We'd love to know your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you pause and think, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who still believes that the quietest people often carry the loudest truths. Because not every story needs a sequel. Some stories are powerful because they end right at the moment when the truth finally speaks. And someone listens. We'll see you in the next story.